She warned me with a smile, said I was too young to understand her kind of danger. But the truth is, I didn't fall for her recklessness. I fell for the way she made silence feel like fire. I didn't expect much from that weekend. Just a few polite meals, a tour of the house, and awkward small talk with my girlfriend's relatives. But the moment her aunt walked in, the air changed. Like someone had dimmed the noise of the world just enough for me to notice her. She wasn't the loud type. She didn't need to be. There was something deliberate about how she moved, as if every gesture carried a private story. Her hair was still damp from the rain, framing her face in soft, uneven waves. She took off her coat slowly, shaking it out with quiet elegance before draping it over the chair. I remember thinking she looked like someone who had lived a few lifetimes before this one. Dinner became a blur of conversation. Laughter, forks against plates, the hum of family stories I wasn't part of. But my attention kept drifting back to her. The way her eyes lingered a little longer than necessary when she listened. The subtle grace of her hands as she poured wine. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried warmth laced with something sharper, like the faint burn of whiskey. When she asked me what I did, her tone wasn't just polite curiosity. It was as if she was testing how seriously I took myself. "You're still figuring it out," she said with a small smile, and I couldn't tell if it was teasing or understanding. Probably both. I caught myself studying her more than once. How she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, how she leaned back when others spoke, her eyes scanning faces like a quiet observer of human behavior. She didn't demand attention. She drew it without effort. At one point, I looked up and found her watching me. Not intensely, not inappropriately. Just calmly, as if she could already read what I was thinking. I looked away first. Later, when the table cleared and people moved toward the living room, she passed by me carrying a tray of glasses. Her shoulder brushed mine. Light, accidental, but enough to leave a warmth that stayed long after she left the room. She didn't turn back, and neither did I. But something in that small contact felt like the beginning of a sentence neither of us intended to finish. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, hearing rain against the window. The house was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. There was a strange weight in my chest. Curiosity mixed with something softer, something that made me uneasy in its simplicity. I told myself it was just admiration, that anyone would be drawn to a woman like her. Composed, assured, unknowably confident. But even then, a part of me knew I'd noticed her in a way I shouldn't have. And yet, if someone had asked me what stood out most about that first night, it wouldn't have been her looks or her voice. It would have been the feeling, that subtle, disarming pull toward someone who seemed to exist at a slightly different frequency than everyone else. I didn't know it then, but that feeling would stay with me, quietly, persistently, long after I left that house. The next few days unfolded like soft, accidental rhythm. Small moments strung together, ordinary on the surface but quietly charged underneath. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. In the kitchen, in the garden, passing through rooms with a calm that made everyone else seem rushed. The first morning, I woke early and wandered down for coffee. The house was still half asleep, the kind of silence where you can hear the floorboards breathe. She was already there, standing by the counter in a light robe, stirring her cup. The window light hit her in a way that made the air itself feel slower. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked without looking up. Her tone was casual, but her awareness was precise. "Too quiet," I said. "Not used to sleeping without traffic outside." She smiled faintly. "That's the thing about quiet. It makes you notice the noise inside your own head." I laughed, mostly to fill the silence she left afterward. She handed me a mug, her fingers brushing mine. It wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't careless either. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, talking about nothing and everything. Books, music, her travels when she was younger, the small tragedies of growing older and realizing how much you've outgrown your old dreams. Her honesty was disarming. She didn't speak to impress. She spoke to remember. There was something about her way of talking, thoughtful pauses, eyes half-focused as if reliving pieces of the past. I found myself wanting to ask questions just to keep her voice in the air. Later that afternoon, I found her in the garden trimming roses. The sun caught the gold threads in her hair, and for a moment she looked almost unreal, a living fragment of memory. She glanced up and smiled. "You're not much for small talk, are you?" "I'm better at listening," I said. "That's rarer than you think." She said it softly, like she wasn't complimenting me, just acknowledging something she'd noticed. I took the clippers from her hand, pretending to help. She watched me, not amused, not resistant, just curious. When I nearly cut a stem wrong, she stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on mine to guide it. "Not like that," she murmured, her breath warm near my ear. It lasted only a second. But in that second, the world seemed to narrow until it was just her voice, her touch, her presence. That evening, at dinner, her niece talked about plans for the weekend, laughter filling the room again. But I barely registered any of it. Across the table, her aunt listened quietly, occasionally meeting my gaze. And every time she did, the air seemed to shift. Not heavily, just enough for me to notice my pulse. It wasn't love. Not yet. It wasn't even desire in the usual sense. It was something slower, gentler, like being drawn toward a gravity I didn't fully understand. And in the back of my mind, I realized this wasn't a connection built in words or glances. It was being built in the spaces between them, in pauses, in small conversations, in every moment that should have meant nothing but somehow did. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind that feels suspended between day and night, when the sky is still half orange and the crickets are just starting their songs. Everyone else had gone into town for dinner, but I'd stayed behind, claiming I needed to finish some work. The truth was simpler. I just wanted a moment alone, or maybe a moment where I might see her again. I found her in the garden. She was sitting on the stone bench beneath the old willow, a half-empty glass of wine resting beside her. The last of the sunlight caught the curve of her face, the soft shadows at her collarbone. For a while, I just watched from a distance, not wanting to interrupt whatever quiet world she was in. When she noticed me, she smiled faintly. Not surprised, not guarded. "You should come out here more," she said. "The garden's best when everyone else forgets it exists." I sat down a few feet away. The air smelled of damp soil and jasmine. The stillness was heavy but comforting, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. She took another sip of wine before setting the glass down. "You know," she said slowly, "when I was your age, I thought life was just a matter of collecting moments. The right city, the right person, the right kind of excitement." She laughed softly. "But you grow older, and you start realizing that peace, real peace, doesn't come from what you chase. It comes from what you learn to stop chasing." Her words hit something in me. Maybe because I was still in that restless stage of wanting everything too quickly. Success, meaning, connection. I told her that, and she looked at me in that thoughtful way of hers. Eyes narrowing, a small smile forming. "You'll figure it out," she said. "You just haven't lived long enough to see how gentle life can be when you let it." We talked for a long time, about art, about people, about loneliness. She told me how she once loved someone who promised her the world but couldn't stay for the quiet parts. "It's always the quiet parts that test us," she said. At some point, I realized I wasn't really hearing her words anymore. I was just listening to her voice, low, calm, carrying a kind of ache that only comes from remembering too much. There was a light breeze, and a few petals fell onto her shoulder. Without thinking, I reached over to brush them off. She didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at me. Not with surprise, but with that same unspoken understanding that had been growing between us since the first night. The moment broke when she turned her gaze back to the horizon. "You should go inside," she said softly. "It's getting cold." I did as she said, but the air around me still felt warm, heavy with the sound of her voice, the scent of wine and roses, and the feeling that I had just crossed into something I couldn't quite name yet. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said, about peace, about letting go, and how strange it was that the most peaceful moment I'd had in years came from sitting beside someone who quietly unsettled everything inside me. The storm came suddenly that night, the kind that rolls in without warning, swallowing the horizon with dark clouds and the electric hum of rain before it breaks. By the time the others returned home, the sky was already roaring. I could hear laughter downstairs, doors shutting, and the faint sound of someone lighting candles as the power flickered out. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was there. The candlelight caught her profile, calm, steady, almost cinematic against the chaos outside. She was barefoot, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly damp from running to close the windows. She glanced over her shoulder when she saw me. "Power's out," she said, her tone even, though there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "You'd think after all these years, this house would have learned to survive a little thunder." I smiled, stepping closer. "You look like you were built for storms." She raised an eyebrow, half a smile playing on her lips. "Careful. Flattery sounds different in the dark." It wasn't flirtation, not yet. It was something quieter, heavier. A truth spoken without intent. The candlelight shimmered between us, and I caught the faint scent of rain in her hair, the warmth radiating from her skin. She handed me a match to light another candle, our fingers brushing light, but lingering. The flame flickered between us, small and fragile, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "Like what?" She paused, then laughed. A low, quiet sound that made the air feel smaller around us. "Like you're not sure whether to run or stay." Her words found their mark. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words tangled somewhere between my throat and my chest. Outside, thunder cracked, followed by a long silence filled only by the rhythm of the rain. She leaned against the counter, her expression unreadable. "You're too young to know how dangerous I am." The way she said it, low almost to herself, made my breath catch. It wasn't arrogance. It was warning, as if she'd seen this kind of closeness before, known what it could cost, and wanted to spare us both the fall. But something in me refused to move. The candlelight flickered again, and I saw the smallest tremor in her hand, the kind that betrays emotion even the calmest person can't hide. I took a step closer, then stopped. We were inches apart, close enough that I could feel her breath, smell the faint trace of her perfume. She didn't back away. Neither did I. For a heartbeat, the world felt impossibly still. Then she whispered, "Go to bed. Before you say something we'll both remember." I nodded, though every part of me wanted to stay. As I turned to leave, she blew out the candle between us, and the room went dark, leaving only the echo of rain and the ghost of something we almost let happen. That night, lying awake, I could still hear her voice, soft, trembling with restraint, and I realized that sometimes the most dangerous kind of closeness is the one that never quite crosses the line. Morning came quietly, as if the house itself was trying to forget the night before. The storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and silence, a silence that felt different now, heavier. I came down to breakfast later than usual. Everyone was gathered around the table again, laughter filling the space, but something between us, between her and me, had shifted. She sat opposite me, hair neatly tied back, reading glasses perched on her nose, flipping through the newspaper like nothing had happened. She didn't look up once. "Sleep well?" someone asked. I nodded. My voice came out too casual. "Yeah, fine." But nothing felt fine. Every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of a chair, the clink of cutlery, her faint sigh when she turned a page. It was the kind of distance you can feel, the kind that isn't created by space but by everything that's been left unsaid. When she finally looked up, it wasn't at me. It was through me. Polite smile, brief and practiced. The same smile she probably gave to strangers in elevators. I hated how much that hurt. After breakfast, I wandered outside, pretending to take a call just to escape the wait in the room. The garden still smelled of rain. The bench where we'd sat 2 nights before was glistening with droplets. For a moment, I could almost see us there again, her laughter soft, her voice low, the calm warmth that used to fill the space between words. I didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "You'll catch a cold out here." I turned, startled. She was standing a few feet away, her sweater pulled close, expression unreadable. "I just needed air," I said. Her gaze softened, briefly. Then, "That's good. Fresh air helps when you've been thinking too much." She meant it as kindness, I think. But there was distance in the way she said it, like she was drawing a line that neither of us could pretend not to see. I wanted to apologize. For what? I didn't even know. For not leaving the kitchen soon enough? For letting silence stretch too long? For the way my eyes had memorized her face in the candlelight? But when I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, she smiled again. Small, restrained. "You're a good man," she said. "Don't ruin that by trying to understand everything that doesn't need to be understood." Then she turned and walked back toward the house. I watched her go, the way her hand brushed the doorway as she passed through. A gesture so simple yet final it left me hollow. The rest of the day drifted by in fragments. Conversations I didn't hear. Meals I barely tasted. Every time she entered a room, I felt it. That strange electricity dulled now by self-control. That night, I heard her laugh faintly from across the hall. Not directed at me, not even aware I was listening. It should have brought comfort, but instead, it left me aching. Because that was the moment I realized something I hadn't before. Sometimes, distance isn't about losing someone. It's about both of you pretending not to already have. My last evening in that house came too soon, and yet it felt like it had been waiting for us all along. I packed slowly, deliberately, as if dragging out the act of leaving could somehow delay the moment itself. Every folded shirt, every sound of the zipper felt heavier than it should. Downstairs, I could hear the murmur of voices, the familiar rhythm of a household that had already moved on from the strange quiet between us. But I knew she was there. I could sense her presence the way you can sense warmth through a closed door. When I finally stepped into the hallway, suitcase in hand, she was waiting. Leaning lightly against the doorway, arms crossed, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Leaving already?" she said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes gave her away. There was something unspoken there, like she'd been rehearsing this moment too. "I have to," I said. "Early train tomorrow. Thought I'd get a head start." She nodded, then took a few steps closer. The hallway light flickered softly, painting her in a golden haze. For a second, we just stood there, close enough to feel the echo of what almost was. "You've been quiet these past few days," she said, almost teasingly. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten how to talk." "I didn't know what to say," I admitted. "I didn't want to make things harder." That made her laugh, a low and tired sound. "You think silence makes things easier?" She was right, of course. It never did. Silence only thickened everything between us. Made it harder to breathe, to look at her without remembering how it felt to almost reach for her hand that night. She took one more step forward, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hug me. Instead, she reached up and straightened my collar. A small, domestic gesture, the kind people do when they're trying to stay ordinary. Her thumb brushed my jaw, barely there, just a whisper of touch. "You'll forget this house," she said softly. "That's what people do when they leave." "I won't forget you." She froze, just a flicker, but enough to tell me the words landed somewhere deep. Then she smiled again, this time sadder, gentler. "Maybe not, but you'll change. That's how forgetting begins." I didn't know what to say after that. The air between us was so full, it felt like anything more would make it break. So I didn't speak. I just looked at her, really looked, at the fine lines near her eyes, the small scar on her chin, the faint tremble in her breathing. Every detail I knew I'd remember even if I tried not to. She reached for the door, opening it to the cool night air. "Go on," she said, "before we make this goodbye harder than it already is." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you for everything." She didn't answer, just watched as I stepped outside. When the door closed behind me, it wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, like something quietly folding in on itself. And as I walked away from that house, suitcase in hand, I realized I wasn't leaving a place. I was leaving a version of myself, one that had learned, too late, that some connections aren't meant to be resolved, only remembered. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories, but not erasing them. It had been almost 7 years since that summer. Since the storm, the silence, the goodbye that never really felt like one. In those years, life unfolded as it does for everyone. New cities, new faces, new lessons learned too late. And yet, every once in a while, something, a scent, a song, the sight of rain would bring her back. Not as longing, but as presence. When I returned to that town, it wasn't for her. At least, that's what I told myself. I was there for work, a conference just a few miles from the old neighborhood. Still, as I drove past familiar streets, the turn toward her house appeared before me like a thought I hadn't realized I was already thinking. The garden looked different now. Wilder, a little overgrown, but still breathing with the same quiet life it always had. The willow tree was taller. The old bench still stood, chipped and mossed with time, but there. I stopped by the gate, not sure if I had the right to enter. Then I heard her voice. "You look like you're thinking your way out of knocking." She was standing in the doorway holding a small watering can, her hair streaked with more silver now. The years had softened her, not dulled her. There was still that same stillness in her, that calm gravity that made everything else seem to slow down around her. For a moment I couldn't speak. She smiled, that same faint curve of the lips I remembered, and waved me in. "Don't just stand there. You'll make the neighbors think I'm being cruel." I followed her into the garden. The air smelled of wet leaves and rosemary. We talked, at first about ordinary things, work, life, how fast the years had gone. But beneath the small talk, there was a quiet current of recognition. The unspoken memory of what we'd been to each other, what we'd almost become. "You've changed," she said after a while, looking at me over the rim of her teacup. "So have you," I replied. She smiled softly. "That's the only thing time promises us." There was no awkwardness now, no tension, just a kind of peace that comes when two people have already lived through the ache of almost. She reached out, placing her hand briefly on my arm, a gesture so natural it made my chest tighten. "You were right," I said quietly. "I never forgot this house." Her eyes flickered with something tender, but she didn't speak. Instead, she turned toward the garden, where the sun was starting to dip, painting everything gold. We stood there a while, not saying anything, just sharing the silence we'd once been too afraid to. When I finally left, she didn't follow me to the door. She just stayed there in the garden, a part of the light itself. As I walked away, I thought of her words, that I was too young to know how dangerous she was. And maybe she was right. But years later, I finally understood what she meant. It wasn't her danger I'd fallen for. It was her depth. And the way she taught me that some loves aren't meant to be lived, only carried quietly through time. "You've changed," she said after a while, looking at me over the rim of her teacup. "So have you," I replied. She smiled softly. "That's the only thing time promises us."